All right, there we go. My microphone did not want to reconnect. I apologize, folks. Welcome back. Oh, wow, we've got a bunch of people tuned in. Welcome back to Free Read Fridays. I'm your intrepid narrator slash host, Fraggeth, and today, there's the button, we will be starting The Ascension Factor by Frank Herbert and Bill Ransom. Okay, it's mostly Bill Ransom, which is the third slash fourth volume of, and final volume of the Pandora Sequence, which starts. I mean, the Pandora Sequence is just the Jesus Effect, the Jesus Effect, the Jesus Incident, the Lazarus Effect, the Ascension Factor. I included Destination Void, even though that is only by Frank Herbert, so far as I know. And because that's kind of a natural prologue, there will be callbacks, or have been callbacks to that, so I felt it was worth doing. So this is, to my knowledge, mostly written by Bill Ransom. Bill Ransom and Frank Herbert did concept work on it together. They discussed ideas on it. There is a prologue intro, or a foreword that Bill Ransom does that I'll probably read, because why not? Which kind of covers the basics. And you'll notice that the prose is a bit different, significantly different. Things move a bit differently, for better or for worse. I know there are some people that have a particularly dim view of this book. I do not share that. I do not think it is my favorite of the trilogy, but it is still an entertaining romp for the most part. There's some bits where I'm like, really? Are you sure? Okay. This moves quickly. It happens over a pretty short time scale, much like the Lazarus Effect did. And it's got a lot of cast, a pretty hefty cast, a bunch of different subplots occurring all at once. So I will likely have difficulty keeping track, let alone anybody listening. So you can be forgiven. Let me get a couple pages set aside here so that I have an arbitrary pausing point. And I don't think there's much to go over here. I can't remember what voices I had thought of for people. That's a little embarrassing. Let's do that for now arbitrarily. That's probably good. Plop. And we will see how this goes. So let's see. YI says, hello, I haven't listened to / read any of the other chapters of this book yet, but I've been really enjoying your free read videos of other sci-fi books. Thanks so much. Face red heart shape. Oh, it doesn't translate into the... not translate that into emojis for some reason. That's interesting. Yes, fortunately, this will be the first chapter thereof. This will be the beginning of this one. The other... you don't need the other books to get something out of this one, but if you have listened to Destination Void, the Jesus Incident, and the Lazarus Effect... why is a door creaking? That's spooky. You will get extra out of it. Let's see. Mostly it's just a fun romp. This book will wind up going by fairly quickly, I think. Going forward after this, I'm thinking we can probably... this will probably be done sometime October. I'm doing too much pre-game blather. I should probably close that window. We'll deal with it. Yeah. I don't think there's anything too crazy else I need to talk about here. I'll let the book speak for itself. Hopefully I'll be able to get most of the cover art in. A lot of it's kind of low resolution. I'm trying to think if there's anything else significant to worry about here. I don't think there is. Nope. I don't think there's any maps either. There were for the Jesus Incident, and I've got to... at some point I'll find those and add them. If people join the Discord and want, like, packages, like zip files of the cover art I've used, just hit me up. I'll happily give it to you. I don't care. I've got it from various locations, and not all of it is high quality. Yeah, okay. So this was published in 1988. That's the copyright date. Where's the published date? Maybe that is the publishing date. That is the publishing date. Very good. Okay. With that, let's get rocking and a-rolling. The cover art pictured here, for what it's worth, is the same cover art of my edition that I have. I don't think it's a first ed. I don't know what it is. I don't know, I bought this off ABE Books for a song. So, just like, absolutely nothing. I don't normally shill things, but I will shill ABE Books. It's what Amazon, back when it was adequate and good, used to be like. Although it's like all third-party resellers. But very, generally pretty good. I've had good luck anyway. All right, without further ado, let's get crack-a-lackin'. And I will have to come up with a couple voices on the fly, and we will go from there. The Ascension Factor by Bill Ransom and Frank Herbert. Introduction. When Frank and I began the Jesus Incident series in 1978, we made only one agreement, that our work together would be fun, that at no time would the story interfere with friendship. We shook on that, as fellow natives in the Puyallup Valley are accustomed to do. We had been friends for a long time, and intended to keep the friendship. Writing a book together, like buying a car together, was something we approached with due caution. It was a little like getting married, this co-author business. As it turns out, each book in the series was marked by a personal tragedy for one or the other of us, but our stories saved us. Over 15 years, I never laughed so hard or so often with anyone as I did working with Frank. The Ascension Factor, a book we had planned to enjoy together, weathered the greatest tragedy of them all. The book goes on. I guess that's the way it is with writers. Frank worked through the plotting and character development of the Ascension Factor, but circumstance left the last writing chore to me. After all these years, it was easy to keep him here, looking over my shoulder, muttering one-liners as I wrote up the last of what we'd started. My greatest fear was that I would lose that sense of presence, of good companionship, when this book ended. With Frank, of all people, I should have known better. Bill Ransom, Port Townsend, 1987. The quality of mercy is not strained. It droppeth as the gentle rain from heaven. Upon the place beneath it is twice blessed. It blesseth him that gives, and takes him that takes. It blesseth him that gives, and him that takes. 'Tis mightiest in the mightiest. William Shakespeare, The Merchant of Venice. Vachon Literature Repository. Jephthah Twain suffered the most exquisite pain for 3 days, and that was the point. The Warriors Union thugs were professionals. If he passed out, he simply wasted their time. In his 3 days at their hands, he had never passed out. They knew that he was no good to them right from the start. The rest of his agony had been the penalty he paid for wasting their time. When they were through tormenting him, at last they hooked him up, as he knew they would, to the obsidian cliff below the high reaches. Subversives were often hooked up to die in full view of the settlement as a lesson. The exact meaning of the lesson was never clear. The three from the Warriors' Union hooked him up there in the dark, as they'd taken him in the dark, and Jephthah thought them cowards for this. His left eyelid was less swollen than the right, and he managed to work it open. A pale hint of dawn pried the starry sky away from the black cheek of the sea. Pre-dawn lights of a commuter ferry wallowed at the dark dockside down below him in the settlement. Like the rest, it loaded up the shift changes of workers at Project Voidship. Running lights from the submersible ferries flickered the night, sea's blackness, all the way from the settlement at catalogued out to the project's launch tower complex. A maze of organic dikes and rock jetties. I do have to close my windows. Give me a sec. It is pouring. More to the point, it's pouring in at me, which is more problematic. Okay, where were we? Here we go. A maze of organic dikes and rock jetties fanned out both up and down coast of catalogued, supporting the new aquaculture projects of Merman Mercantile, none of which had hired Jephthah after his fishing gear had been seized and his license revoked. His partner had kept a couple of fish for himself instead of registering them dockside. The director's new economy prohibited this, and the director's henchmen made a lesson of both of them. Under the opening sky of morning, Jephthah felt himself lighten, then separate from his body. He peeled the pain from himself, his self wriggling free of its wounded skin like a molted screet, and watched the sagging wretch of his flesh from atop a boulder a couple of meters away. This far south, Pandora's days lasted nearly 14 hours. He wondered how many more breaths he had left in his sack of cracked ribs and pain. Marika, he thought. My Marika and our 3 little Watts. The Warriors' Union said they'd hunt them down, too. They would think maybe she had something to tell. They would claim that his woman and their 3 little ones were dangerous, subversive. They would start on the children to make her talk, and she could say nothing. She knew nothing. Jephthah squeezed his good eye closed against his blood and shame. The director's special squad of the Warriors' Union had pierced Jephthah's chest and back with maki hooks, steel fishhooks with a cruel incurve the size of his thumb. They caught the glimmer of fresh daylight like armor across his chest. The steel snaffles and cable leaders hung to his knees like a kilt. The glitter of the hooks, as well as the smell of his blood, would attract the dasher that would kill him. Jephthah had caught thousands of maki on hooks like these, set tens of thousands of these ganyons on hundreds of long lines. Most of them hung free now, clinking with his movements or the rare morning breeze. His weight hung from 24 of them, 12 puncturing the skin of his chest and 12 through his back. He thought this had a significant chance, too, but they had not told him what it was. But they had told him what he'd wanted to know for years. The shadows are real. Jephthah played the thought over and over. The shadows are real. Everyone had heard about these shadows, but no one he knew had ever met one. Now, in the last few months, had come the mysterious broadcasts that came on the holo, or the telly, or the radio made by Shadowbox. Everybody said those were the work of the shadows. There were stories in every village about their fight to depose the dictator, Raja Flattery, and hamstring his hired muscle. The nightly news reported daily on shadow activities, detoured supplies, food theft, sabotage. Anything unpopular or harmful to the director's cause was laid at the shadow's hatch, including natural disasters. Shadowbox, using pirated airspace and great expertise, reported on the director. Jephthah had whispered around many a hatchway trying to join up with the shadows, but no word came forward. Shadowbox had given him enough hope that he had set out to strike his own blow. He understood, now, that this was how the shadows worked. He'd wanted to destroy the seat of power itself, the main electrical station between the director's private compound and the sprawling manufactured settlement adjacent to it, catalogued. The power station that Jephthah chose was a hydrogen retrieval plant that supplied hydrogen, oxygen, and electricity to all of the subcontractors in the director's space program. Blowing the plant would set Flattery's precious Project Void ship and his orbiting factory on its heels for a while. The poor of the town were used to doing without, Jephthah reasoned. Thousands didn't even have electricity. It would be this new Void ship project and Flattery who would be most crippled. He should have known that the director's security had already thought of that. The interrogation had been very old-fashioned, as most of them were. He'd been caught easily and forced to stand naked under a hood for 3 days while being tortured for nothing. Now a host of steel snaffles clinked against hooks whenever any of his muscles moved. His wounds, for the most part, had stopped bleeding. That just made the flies sting him more. 2 poisonous flatwings crawled his left leg, fluttering their wings in some ritual dance, but neither bit. "Dashers," he prayed. "If it's anything, let it be dashers and quick." That was what they'd hung him out there for, dasher bait. The hooded dasher would strike him hard, as is their habit, then it would get hung up on the maki hooks and snare itself. The hide would bring a pretty price in the village market. It was an amusement to the security guards, and he'd heard them planning to split the change they'd get for the hide. He didn't want to be nibbled to death. A dasher would accommodate him nicely. His mouth was so dry from thirst that his lips split every time he coughed. In this hungry downslide of his life, Jephthah had dared to hope for 2 things: to join up with the shadows, and to glimpse Her Holiness, Krista Gali. He had tried his best with the shadows. Here, chained to the rocks overlooking the director's compound, Jephthah watched the stirrings of the great household through his darkening vision. "One of them might be her," he thought. He was light-headed, and he puffed his chest against the hooks and thought, "If I were a shadow, I'd get her out of there." Krista Gali was the Holy Innocent, a mysterious young woman born deep in the wild kelp beds 24 years ago. When Flattery's people blew up a rogue kelp bed 5 years back, Krista Gali surfaced with the debris. How she'd been raised by the kelp underwater and delivered back to humankind was one of those mysteries that Jephthah and his family accepted simply as miracle. It was rumored that Krista Gali held the hope for Pandora's salvation. People claimed that she would feed the hungry, heal the sick, comfort the dying. The director, a chaplain psychiatrist, kept her locked away. "She needs protection," Flattery had said. "She grew up with the kelp. She needs to know what it is to be human." How ironic that Flattery would set out to teach her how to be human. Jephthah knew now, with the clarity of his pain and transcendence, that she was the director's prisoner down there as much as all Pandorans were his slaves. Except for now, at the base of the high reaches, Jephthah's chains had been invisible. Hunger chains, propaganda chains, the chain of fear that rattled in his head like cold teeth. He prayed that the security would not find Marcia and the Watts. The settlement sprawled. People hid people like fish among fish. Maybe. He shook his head, clinking the terrible hooks and snaffles. He felt nothing except the cool breeze that wafted up from morning low tide. It brought the familiar iodine scent of kelp decomposing on the beach. There, at that port high in the main building. The glimpse was gone, but Jephthah's heart raced. His good eye was not focusing, and a new darkness was upon him, but he was sure that the form he'd seen had been the pale Christa Gali. She can't know of this, he thought. If she knew what a monster Raja Flattery is, and she could do it, she would destroy him. Surely, if she knew, she would save us all. His thoughts again turned to Marcia and the Watts. Oh my goodness, it's going to be one of those days. Is garbage. His thoughts again turned to Marcia and the Watts. The thoughts were not so much thoughts as dreams. He saw her with the children, hand in hand, traversing an upcoast field in the sunlight. The single sun was bright but not scorching. There were no bugs. Their bare feet were cushioned by the fleshy blossoms of 1,000 kinds of flowers. A dasher shriek from somewhere below him jerked him out of his dream. He knew there was no field without bugs, nowhere on Pandora to stroll barefoot through blossoms. He knew that Vashon's security and the Warriors' Union were known for their persistence, their efficiency, their ruthlessness. They were after his wife and their children, and they would find them. His last hope was that the dasher would find him before they hooked what was left of Marcia up here by his side. Again, we have let another chaplain psychiatrist kill tens of thousands of us, islander and merman alike. This new CP, Raja Flattery, calls himself the Director, but he will see. We have kissed the ring and bared the throat for the last time. First Shadowbox broadcast, 5 Bunrati, 493. First light through the single plasma glass pane stroked a plain white pillow with its rosy fingers. It outlined the sparse but colorful furnishings of this cubby in shades of gray. The cubby itself, though squarely on land and squarely gridded to a continent, reflected traditions of a culture freely afloat for nearly 5 centuries on Pandora's seas. These islanders, the bio-wizards of Pandora, grew everything. They grew their cups and bowls, the famous chair dogs, insulation, bondable organics, rugs, shelves, and the islands themselves. This cubby was organically furnished, and under the old law warranted a heft of supply chits that converted easily to food coupons. Black market coupons were a cheap enough price for the Director to pay to assimilate the islander culture that had been dashed to the rocks the day he splashed down on the sea. As the grip of dawn strengthened into morning, it further brightened the single wall hanging of clasped hands that enriched this small cubby. Red and blue fishes swam the border, their delicate fins interlacing broad green leaves of kelp. Orange fin and blue leaf joined at the foot of the hanging to form a stylized oracle. The tight stitch of the pattern and its crisp colors all rippled with the progress of dawn. A sleeper's chest rose and fell gently on the bed beneath them. The night and its shadows shrank back from the plasma glass window at the head of the bed. Islanders had always enjoyed the light, and in building their islands they let it in wherever they could. They persisted in light, even though most of them were now solidly marooned on land. In their undersea dwellings, mermen put pictures on their walls of the things they wall out. Islanders preferred the light, the breezes, the smells of life and living. This cubby was small and spare, but light. This was a regal cubby, regularly inspected, a part of the shopkeeper's quarters. It was a second-floor street room above the new Ace of Cups coffee shop at catalogued Herbert. A huge white coffee cup swung from a steel rod beneath the window. Almost synchronous with the sleeper's breathing came the slup, slup of waves against the bulkhead below. Respirations caught, then resumed at the occasional splashings of a waking squawk and the wind chime effect of sail riggings that clapped against a host of masts. Dawn brightened the room enough to reveal a seated figure beside the bed. The posture was one of alert stillness. This stillness was broken by an occasional move of cup to mouth, then back to the knee. The figure sat, back to the wall, beside the plaz and facing the hatch. First light glinted from a shining, intricately inlaid islander cup of hardwood and mother-of-pearl. The hand that held the cup was male, neither delicate nor calloused. The figure leaned forward once, noting the depth of the sleeper's odd, open-eyed slumber. The progress of light across the bay outside their room was reflected in the hardening of shadows inside and their relentless crawl. The watcher, Ben Ozette, pulled the cover higher over the sleeper's bare shoulder to ward off morning dampness. The pupils in her green irises stayed wide with the onset of dawn. He closed her eyes for her with his thumb. She didn't seem to mind. The shudder that passed over him uncontrollably was not due to the morning chill. She was a picture of white. White hair, eyelashes, eyebrows, and a very fair porcelain skin. Her shaggy white hair was cropped around her face, falling nearly to her shoulders in the back. It was a perfect frame to those green, bright eyes. His hand strayed to the pillow, then back. His profile in the light revealed the high cheekbones, aquiline nose, and high eyebrows of his merman ancestry. In his years as a reporter for Holovision, Ben Ozette had become famous, his face as familiar planet-wide as that of a brother or a husband. Listeners worldwide recognized his voice immediately. On their Shadowbox broadcasts, however, he became writer and camera-master, and Rico got out in the lights. In disguise, of course. Now their family, friends, co-workers would feel the snap of Flattery's wrath. They hadn't exactly had time to plan. During their weekly interviews, they both noticed how everyone, including compound security, stayed well out of microphone range as they taped. The next time they walked the grounds as they taped, interviewing with gusto. Then last night they simply walked out. Rico did the rest. The prospect of being hunted by Flattery's goons dried Ben's mouth a little. He sipped a little more water. Maybe it's true. Maybe she's a construction, he thought. She's too perfectly beautiful to be an accident. If the director's memos were right, she was a construction, something grown by the kelp, not someone born of a human. When dredged up at sea, she was judged by the examining physician to be a green-eyed albino female, about 20, in respiratory distress secondary to ingestion of seawater. Agitated, recent memory excellent, remote memory judged to be poor, possibly absent. End quote. It had been 5 years since she had washed out of the sea and into the news, and in that 5 years Flattery had allowed no one but his lab people near her. Ben has asked to do the story... I think that should be past tense. Ben had asked to do the story out of curiosity, and wound up pursuing more than he'd bargained for. He'd learned to hate the director, and as he watched Krista's fitful sleep, he wasn't the least bit sorry. He had to admit that, yes, he knew from the first that it had always been a matter of time. He'd fought Flattery and Holovision too openly and too long. A recent Shadowbox accused Holovision of being a monopoly of misinformation. Flattery's propaganda agent that would not remain... Oh, okay, I thought that was a recent shadow box accused Holovision of being a monopoly of misinformation, Flattery's propaganda agent that would not regain credibility until it became worker-owned. Ben had leveled the same attack at the production assistant on the previous day. Ben found himself being preempted by propagandistic little specials that Flattery's technicians were grinding out. Ben and Rico had bought or built their own cameras and laser bases to minimize the company's intimidation and Flattery's interference. Now they had full-time, non-paying jobs as air pirates with Shadowbox. And fugitives, he thought. Ben Ozette eased back into the old chair dog and let the sleeper lie. Of all the deadliness on Pandora, this sleeper could be the most deadly. It was rumored that people had died at her touch, and this was not just the director's professional rumor mill. Ben had dared touch her, and he was not yet one of the dead. It was rumored she was very, very bright. He whispered her name under his breath. Krista Gali. Her breathing skipped. She sniffed once, twice, and settled down. Krista Gali had green eyes. Even now they opened ever so slightly, turning toward the sun, visible but not waking. Eerie. Ben's last love, his longest love, had brown eyes. She had also been his only love, practically speaking. That was Beatrice. Her coffee-colored eyes became vivid to him now against the shadows. Yes, Beatrice. They were still good friends, and she would take this hard. Ben's heart jumped a beat whenever their wakes crossed, and they crossed often at Holovision. Beatrice took on her series about Flattery's space program. She was away for weeks at a time. Ben freelanced docudramas on earthquake survivors, islander relocation camps, and an in-depth series on the kelp. His latest project featured Krista Gali and her life since her rescue in the kelp. Flattery agreed to the series, and Ben agreed to confine the material to her rescue and subsequent rehabilitation. This project led him into Raja Flattery's most sacred closets, and further away from Beatrice. The Holovision rumor mill claimed that she and the Orbiter commander, Dwarf Macintosh, were seeing each other lately. Through his own choice, Ben and Beatrice had been separated for nearly a year. He knew she'd find someone else eventually. Now that it was real, he decided he'd better get used to it. Beatrice Tatouche was the most stunning correspondent on Holovision, and one of the toughest. Like Ben, she did field work for Holovision Nightly News. She also hosted a weekly feature on the director's Project Voidship, a project of great religious and economic controversy. Beatrice championed the project. Ben remained a vocal opponent. He was glad he'd kept her away from the Shadowbox plan. At least she didn't have to be on the run. Those dark eyes of hers. Ben snapped himself alert and shook off the vision of Beatrice. Her wide eyes and broad smile dissolved in the sunrise. The woman who slept, Krista Gali, put quite a stutter into his heartbeat the first time he saw her. Though she was young, she had more encyclopedic knowledge than anyone he'd ever met. Facts were her thing. About her own life, her nearly 20 years down under, she apparently knew very little. Ben's agreement with Flattery prohibited much probing of this while they were inside the preserve. She had dreams of value, and so he let her dream. He would ask about them when she woke, keep them with his notes, and the two of them would make a plan. This, he realized, was something of a dream in itself. There was already a plan, and he would follow the rest of it as soon as he was told what it was. Today, for the first time, she would see what the people had been made of. Today, for the first time, she would see what the people had made of the myth that was Krista Gali, the holy being that had been kept away from them for so long. She could not know, closed away from humans as she'd been for all of her 24 years, what it meant that she had become the people's god. He hoped that, when the crunch came, she would be a merciful god. Someone entered the building below, and Ben tensed, setting his cup aside. He patted his jacket pocket where the weight of his familiar recorder had been replaced by Rico's old laser gun. There was the rush of water and the chatter of a grinder downstairs. A rich coffee fragrance wafted up to him, set his stomach growling. He sipped more water from the cup and half relaxed. Ben felt his memories pale with the light, but the light did not still his unease. Things were out of control in the world. That had made him uneasy for years. He had a chance to change the world, and he wasn't letting go of it. Flattery's totalitarian fist was something that Beatrice had refused to see. Her dreams lay out among the stars, and she would believe almost anything if it would take her there. Ben's dreams lay at his feet. He believed that Pandorans could make this the best of all worlds once the director were moved aside. Now that things were out of control in his personal life, it made him, for the first time, a little bit afraid. Ben was glad for the light. He reminisced in the dark, but he always felt he thought best in the light. The fortune, the future of millions of lives lay sleeping in this cubby. Krista could be either the savior of humanity or its destroying angel. Or neither. Shadowbox would do its best to give her the chance at savior. Ben and Krista Gali stood at the vortex of the two conflicts dividing Pandora, Flattery's handhold on their throats, and the Avata/human standoff that kept it there. Krista Gali had been born in Avata, the kelp. She represented a true Avata-human mix, reputed to be the sole survivor of a long line of poets, prophets, and genetic tinkering. She had been educated by the kelp's store of genetic memories, human and otherwise. She knew without being taught. She'd heard echoes of the best and the worst of humanity fed to her mind for nearly 20 years. There were some other echoes, too. The others, the thoughts of Avata itself, those were the echoes that the director feared. "The kelp sent her to spy on us," Flattery was heard to have said early on. "No telling what it's done to her subconscious." Krista Gali was one of the great mysteries of genetics. The faithful claimed she was a miracle made flesh. "I did it myself," she told him during their first interview, "as we all do." Or, as she put it in their last interview, "I made a good selections from the DNA buffet." Flattery's fear had kept Krista under what he called protective custody for the past 5 years, while the people clamored worldwide for a glimpse. The director's Vashon security force provided the protection. It was the Vashon security force that hunted them now. She could be a monster, Ben thought, some kind of time bomb set by Avata to go off when? Why? The great body of kelp that some called Avata directed the flow of all currents and, therefore, all shipping planet-wide. It calmed the ravages of Pandora's two-sun system, making land and the planet itself possible. Ben, and many others, believed that Avata had a mind of its own. Krista Gali stirred, tucked herself further under the quilt, and resumed her even breathing. Ben knew that killing her now while she slept might possibly save the world and himself. He had heard that argument among the rabid right, among those accustomed to working with Flattery. Possibly. But Ozette believed now that she could save the world for Avata and human alike, and for... But Ozette believed that now... Okay, there we go. But Ozette believed now that she could save the world for Avata and human alike, and for this he vowed to guard her every breath. For this, and for the stirrings of love that strained in old traces. Spider Nevi and his thugs hunted the both of them now. Ben had wooed her away from the director's very short leash, but Krista did the rest. Krista and Rico. Ben knew well that the leash would become a lash, a noose for himself and possibly for her next time, and he had better see to it that there was nothing in the world more deadly, more valuable than Krista Gali. It was certain the man who'd made off with her wouldn't be lightly spared. Ben was 40 now. At 15, he'd been plunged into war with the sinking of Guime's Island. Many thousands died that day, brutally slashed, burned, drowned at the attack of a huge merman submersible, a kelp trimmer that burst through the center of the old man-made island, lacerating everything in its path. Ben had been ringside when the sudden lurch and collapse sent him tumbling into the pink-frothed sea. The years since and the horrors he had seen gave him a wisdom of sorts, an instinct for trouble and the escape hatch. This wisdom was only wisdom as long as he kept alive, and he remembered how easily he had thrown instinct out the porthole the time he fell in love with Beatrice. He had not thought that could happen again until the day he met Christa Gali, a meeting that had been half motivated at the possibility of seeing Beatrice somewhere inside Flattery's compound. Christa had whispered, "Help me," that day, and while swimming in her green-eyed gaze, he'd said, simply, "Yes." In her head sleeps the great wisdom, he thought. If she can unlock it without destroying herself, she can help us all. Even if it wasn't true, Ben knew that Flattery thought it was true, and that was good enough. She rolled over, still asleep, and turned her face up at the prospect of the dim light. Keep you away from light, they say, he thought. Keep you away from kelp, keep you away from the sea. Don't touch you. In his back pocket he carried the precautionary instructions in case he accidentally touched her bare skin. And what would operations think if they knew I'd kissed her? He chuckled and marveled at the power beside him in that room. The director had already seen to it that no interview of Christa Gali would ever be aired. Now, at Flattery's direction, Holovision had lured Beatrice with an extra hour of airtime a week, glorifying Flattery's Project Voidship. Beatrice is running blind, he thought. She loves the idea of exploring the void so much that she's ignored the price that Flattery's exacting. Flattery's fear of Christa's relationship with the kelp had kept her under guard. The director sequestered her, quote, "for her own protection, for study, for the safety of all humankind," unquote. Despite weekly access to Flattery's private compound, Beatrice showed no interest in Christa Gali. She lobbied his support, however, when Ben had requested the interviews. Maybe she hoped to see more of me, too. Maybe she hoped to see more of me, too. Beatrice was wedded to her career, just as Ben was, and something as nebulous as a career made pretty intangible competition. Ben couldn't understand how Beatrice let the Christa Gali story slip through her fingers. Today, he was very happy that she had. Fire smolders in a soul more surely than it does under ashes. Gaston Bachelard, The Psychoanalysis of Fire. Kalen woke up from his nestling spot between his mother's large breasts to loud curses and a scuffle a few meters down. The line. Oh, that is not a period. That is a proper noun. Kalen woke up from his nestling spot between his mother's large breasts to loud curses and a scuffle a few meters down the line. The chime overhead told 5, the same as his fingers, same as his years. He did not look in the direction of the scuffle because his mother told him it was bad luck to look at people having bad luck. A pair of line patrolmen appeared with their clubs. There were the thudding noises again, and the morning quieted down. He and his warm mother stayed wrapped in her drape, at the same one that had shaded them the day before. This morning, at the chime of 5, they had been in the line for 17 hours. His mother warned him how long it would be. At noon the previous day, Kalen had looked forward to seeing the inside of the food place, but after everything he'd seen in the line, he just wanted to go home. They had slept the last few hours at the very gates of the food place. Now he heard footsteps behind the gates, the metallic unclick of the locks. His mother brushed off their clothes and gathered all of their containers. He already wore the pack she'd made him. He hadn't taken it off since they turned in their scrap. Kalan wanted to be ready when she negotiated rice, because carrying the rice back home was his job. They had made it right up to the warehouse door at midnight, then it had locked in their faces. His mother helped him read the sign at the door. Closed for cleaning and restocking, 12 to 5. He wanted to start his job carrying the rice now so he could be going home. Not yet. His mother tugged his shirt tail to restrain him. They're not ready. They just beat us back. An older woman behind Kalan clucked her tongue and collected a breath on an inward hiss. Look there, she whispered, and lifted a bony finger to point at the figure of a man trotting down the street. He looked backward toward the docks more than forward, so he stumbled a lot, and he ran with his hands over his ears. As he ran by, he crouched, wild-eyed, as though everyone in the line would eat him. As two of the security moved to cross the street, the short young man skittered away down the street, uttering frightened, out-of-breath cries that Kalan didn't understand.
Drift, ninny,
the old woman said.
One of those family islands must have grounded. It's hardest for them.
She raised her reedy voice to lecture pitch.
The unfathomable wrath of ship will strike the infidel flattery. Shut up!
A security barked, and she muttered herself to silence. Then there arose in the line a grumbled discussion of the difficulties of adjustment, the same kind of talk that Kalan had heard muttered around the home fire when they first settled here from the sea. He didn't remember the sea at all, but his mother told him stories about how beautiful their little island was, and she named all the generations that had drifted their island before Kalan was born. The line woke up and stretched and passed the word back in a serpentine ripple. Keys up. Hey, keys are up. Keys, sister, keys up. His mother stood and leaned against the wall to balance herself as she strapped on her pack. Hey, sister! A scar-faced security reached between Kalan and his mother and tapped the side of her leg with his stick. Off the warehouse. Come on, you know better. She stepped right up to his nose as she shouldered her carryall, but she didn't speak. He did not back down. Kalan had never seen anyone who didn't back down to his mother. First tickets up, alphabetical order, left to right, he said. This time he tapped his stick against her bottom. Get moving. Then they were inside a press of bodies and through the gates, into a long, narrow room. Where Kalan had expected to see the food place, he saw instead a wall with a line of stalls. An attendant and a security, armed with a stun stick, flanked each stall. And out of each one jutted what he thought must be the nose or tongue of some great demon. His mother hurried him and their things to the furthest stall. Those are conveyor belts, she explained. They go way back into the building and bring out our orders to us, and they drop it here. We give our order and our coupons to this woman, and someone inside fetches it for us. But I thought we could go inside. I can't take you inside, she said. Some things we can get on the way home when the market opens. I'll take you around to see all the booths and vendors. Order. His mother handed the list to the guard, who handed it to the attendant. The attendant had only one eye, and she had to hold the list close to her face to read it. Slowly, she crossed off certain items. Kalan couldn't see which ones. He couldn't read everything on the list, but his mother had read it to him, and he knew everything by where it was. He could see that about half of what they wanted was crossed out. The attendant typed the remainder of the list onto a keyboard. It hummed and clicked, and then they waited for their food to come down the great belt out of the wall. Kalan could stand at the very end of the belt and look along its length, but it didn't give him a very good view of the insides of the food place. He could see that there were lots of people and lots of stacks of food, most of it packaged. His mother told him they would get their fish from a vendor outside. He thought this funny. His father was a fisherman, but they couldn't eat his fish. They had to buy it from vendors like everyone else. One man who had fished with his father for 2 years disappeared. Kalan heard his parents talking, and they said it was because he smuggled a few fish home instead of turning them all in at the docks. The first package off the belt was rice. The first package off the belt was his rice, wrapped in a package of pretty green paper from the islanders. It was heavier than he thought 5 kilos would be. His mother helped him slip the package inside his backpack, a perfect fit. Suddenly there were shouts from all around them at once. He and his mother were knocked down, and they curled together for protection under the lip of the conveyor belt. Heavy doors slid down to close the opening over each belt, and the larger gates that they'd come through clanged shut. A mob had rushed the warehouse, and the security was battling them off. A dozen or more burst through before the gate was shut. "We're hungry now!" one of them shouted. "We're hungry now!" They fought with the guards, and Kalan saw blood puddle the deck beside him. The men from the mob carried strange-looking weapons, sharpened pieces of metal with tape wrapped for a handle, sharpened pieces of wire. People furiously slashed and poked and clubbed each other. The line people, like Kalan and his mother, curled up wherever they could. One of the looters grabbed Kalan's pack, but the boy held on tight. The man swung the pack up and snapped it like a whip, but Kalan still held on. The man's sunken-eyed face was spattered with blood from a cut over his nose. His gasping breath reeked of rotten teeth. "Let go, boy, or I'll cut you." Kalan had a good grip with both hands, and he kept it. A guard struck the looter on the back of his neck with a stun stick set on high. Kalan felt the tiniest tingle of it transmitted from the man's hand to the bag to Kalan. The man dropped with an oof. Then he didn't move any more than the bag of rice. Kalan's mother grabbed him and hugged him as the guards clubbed the rest of the looters unconscious. He tried not to look at the pulpy faces and splatterings of blood, but it seemed they were everywhere. As he burrowed his face deep between his mother's breasts, he felt her weeping. She stroked his head and wept quietly, and he heard the security dragging off the bodies, beating some of them who were coming around. "Oh, babe," his mother cried and whispered, "this is no place for you. This is no place for anybody." Kalan ignored the barking of guards around them and concentrated on his mother's softness and on the tight grip he kept on their rice. Human hibernation is to animal hibernation as animal hibernation is to constant wakefulness. In its reduction of life processes, hibernation approached absolute stasis. It is nearer death than life. Dictionary of Science, 155th edition. For those listening, that is hibernation with a Y, Hybernation versus Hibernation. This is a concept brought up in earlier titles. Mostly, in fact, I think that's a direct quote from Destination Void. The director, Raja Flattery, woke once again with a scream in his throat. The nightmare tonight was typical. A tenaculous mass had snatched his head and wrenched it off his shoulders. It dismembered his body, but it held his head in its own slithering members so that he could watch the action. The tentacles became fingers, a woman's fingers, and when they pulled the meat from his body's bones, there was only a sound like a match flaring in a stairwell. He woke up, trying to gather his flesh and reassemble it on the bone. Nightmares like this one had dogged him throughout the 25 years since the hibernation ordeal. He had not wanted to admit it, but it was true that they were worse since the incident with his shipmate, Alyssa Marsh. There was that pattern, too. Night after night he felt the raw pain in each muscle anew as something pulled his veins and fibers apart. His early training as a chaplain psychiatrist on Moonbase had been little help this time. The physician had given up trying to heal himself. "Get used to it," he told himself. "Looks like it's going to be here for a while." Even in its after-fright reflection, his face in the cubby-side mirror oozed disdain. His upraked black eyebrows raked upward even further, adding to the appearance of disdain. He felt he wore that look well. He would remember to use it. What color were her eyes? He couldn't remember. Brown, he guessed. Everything about Alyssa Marsh was becoming indistinct as sun-bleached newsprint. He'd thought she would become unimportant as well. Flattery's brown eyes stared down their own reflection. His attention was caught by faint flickerings of colored lights through the plas from a kelp bed beyond his cubby. It was a much more mature stand than he'd suspected. Early studies debated whether the kelp communicated by such lights. If so, to whom? At the director's orders, all kelp stands linked to current control were pruned back at the first sign of the lights, a safety precaution. After the lights, that's when the trouble starts. He was sure that patch had been pruned just a week ago at his directive. Both Marsh and McIntosh had harped on the kelp so much that Flattery had stopped listening to them. The one thing that both of them said that pricked his ears was their common reference to the kelp's recent growth. Explosive. They had both showed him the exponential function at work on the graphs, but he had not appreciated their alarm until now. Flattery dispatched a memo to have this stand of kelp pruned today. Beyond the kelp bed sprawled the greater lights of catalogued, where bleary-eyed commuters already lined up for the Project Ferry, and the line was stirring at Midtown. If he were outside now, he might hear the thankless clank of mill machinery or the occasional blast of an explosive weld. Christa golly, he thought, and glanced at the time. Only an hour since he'd fallen asleep. Wherever she was, she and that Ozette, they wouldn't dare move until curfew lifted. Now is when it would be easy for them. Now, when the roadways fill with people for the day, they will be bodies in a throng, anonymous. A steady stream of dirtbaggers found their way to Kalaloch every day. He would order the press to quit calling them refugees, so that he could deal more directly with them. Now that he had Holovision under control, he could focus on wiping out this maverick broadcast that called itself Shadowbox. He knew in his gut that Ozette was the prong of this most annoying thorn, a prong that Flattery was going to enjoy blunting. Through the plas, the director could make out the dull glow of a ring of fires from one of the dirtbag camps a little farther down coast. The Refugee Committee's report was due this morning. He would use whatever was in it to have the camp moved farther from the settlement perimeter. Maybe down coast a few clicks. If they want protection, they can pay for it. The dirtbagger presence as a potential labor crop kept the factory workers and excavation crews sharp. Dirtbaggers attracted predators, human and otherwise. Flattery's real objection was to their numbers and how they were beginning to surround him. He keyed a note to change the name of the Refugee Committee to Reserve Committee.
Raja Flattery, long before he became known as the Director, was always at work before dawn. Rumors had come back to him that he went months without sleep, and there were months when he thought that was true. His personal cubby resembled a cockpit in its wraparound array of formidable electronics. He liked the feeling of control it gave him here, putting on the world like a glove. Nestled there at his console, shawl across his bare shoulders, Flattery flew the business of the world. He woke every night sweating and in stark terror after only a few hours' sleep. He dreamed himself both executioner and condemned, dying at his own hand while screaming at himself to stop. It was all mindful of Alyssa Marsh, and how he had separated her magnificent brain from the rest of her. This was a subconscious display of vulnerability he could not allow to show. It made him reclusive in many respects, as did the distrust for open spaces that had been deeply instilled in him at Moonbase. Flattery had not yet slept with a Pandoran woman. He'd had a brief fling with Alyssa back on Moonbase just before their departure for the Void. An attempt to continue the liaison on Pandora had failed. She had preferred her excursions into the Kelp to bedding the Director and had suffered the consequences. Now it appeared that he suffered them too. With Pandoran women there were trysts in the cushions, yes, and lively sex as often as he liked, particularly at first. But each time when it was finished he had the woman sent to the guest suite, and Flattery slept what little he could before the dreams had at him. Power, the great aphrodisiac. He didn't sneer. It had served him well. He supposed he should take more advantage of favors offered, but sex didn't impassion him as it used to, not since he'd been flying the world. As miserable a little world as it was his world, and it would stay his until he left it. 6 months, he muttered. After 25 years, only 6 months to go. Nearly 3,000 humans had orbited Pandora in the hibernation tanks for a half-dozen centuries. Of the original crew, only Flattery and Dwarf Macintosh still survived. There were still the 3 organic mental cores, of course, but they weren't exactly human anymore, just brains with some fancy wiring. Only one of them, Alyssa Marsh, had received OMC backup training. The other 2 had been infants, selected personally by Flattery for their high intelligence and early demonstration of emotional stability. Smaller than Earth, but bigger than the Moon, he had thought after being wrenched out of hibernation. Pandora is an adequate little world. It became inadequate soon enough. The native stock who preceded him to Pandora, descendants of the original crew of the void ship Earthling and the Earthling's bioexperiments, were humans of a sort. Flattery found them repulsive, and decided early on that if one void ship had found Pandora, another might find something better. Even if it didn't, Flattery fancied void ship life to be a sight more comfortable than this. They can all rot in this pest hole, he thought. It smells as if they already have. On clear evenings, Flattery derived great pleasure from watching the near-finished bulk of his void ship in glittering position overhead. He'd pinned a magnificent jewel to the shirt of the sky, and he was proud of that. Some of these Pandorans are barely recognizable as living creatures, much less human beings, he thought. Even their genetics has been contaminated by that kelp. All the more reason to get off this planet. His life at Moonbase had taught him well. Space was a medium, not a barrier. A void ship was home, not a prison. Despite great hardship, these mermen had developed rocketry, and their undersea launch site sophisticated enough to bring Flattery and the Hive tanks out of a centuries-old orbit. If they could do that, he knew from the start he could build a void ship like Earthling. And now he had. If you control the world, you don't worry about cost, he thought. His only unrestrained enemy was time. His only trusted associate groundside was a Pandoran, Spider Nevi. Nevi hesitated at nothing to see that the Director's special assignments, his most sensitive assignments, were carried out. Flattery had thought Dwarf Mackintosh, shipside commander on the Orbiter, to be such a man, but lately Flattery wasn't quite so sure. The squad he was sending up today would find out soon enough. The more fascinating man, to Flattery, was Spider Nevy, but he never seemed to get Nevy to open up to him, though he had presented ample opportunity. How do you entertain an assassin? Most of Flattery's fellow humans died immediately with the opening of the hibernation tanks. Their original void ship had been outfitted to bring them out properly, safely. When the time came, the ship was long gone over the horizon, leaving the Pandoran natives in pursuit of the hive tanks and firm as ever in their belief that ship itself was God. Died immediately. Died immediately. He snorted at the euphemism that his mind dealt him. In that moment that the medtechs called immediately, he and his shipmates had experienced enough nerve-searing pain to last 12 lifetimes. Most of his people who survived the opening of the tanks, who had known no illness during their sterile lives at Moonbase, died in the first few months of exposure to Pandora's creatures, microscopic and otherwise. Among the otherwise that Flattery learned to respect were the cat-like hooded dashers, venomous flatwings, spinnerets, swift grazers, and, deadliest of all in Flattery's mind, this sea full of the kelp that the locals called Avata. The first far-thinking chaplain psychiatrist to encounter the kelp had had the good sense to wipe it out. Flattery diverted more than half of his resources to pruning programs. Killing it off was out of the question so far. He had spent his recovery studying Pandoran history and the horrors that the planet had in store for him. He and his shipmates had splashed down in the middle of Pandora's greatest geological and social upheaval. The planet was coming apart, and certain civil disputes were flaring. It was a propitious time to be construed as a gift from the gods, and Flattery took swift advantage of it. Propitious, or is it propitious? I'm not actually sure. Propitious. Propitious? 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 I'm going to go with propitious. We're never probably going to see that word again. He used his title as chaplain psychiatrist, a position that still carried weight among Pandorans, to lead the reorganization of Pandoran mores and economics. They chose him because they had never been without a chaplain psychiatrist, and because, as he was swift to remind them, he was a gift from the ship that was God. He waited a good while to tell them he was building another one. Flattery had been perceptive, shrewd, and because he noted some distracting murmurings among their religious leaders, he changed his title to simply the Director. This freed him for some important economic moves, and the ship worshippers stayed out of his way during the crucial formative years. "I will not be your god," he had told them. "I will not be your prophet to the gods, but I will direct you in your efforts to build a good life." They didn't know what Flattery knew of the special training of void ship chaplain psychiatrists. Pandoran histories revealed that Flattery's clone sibling, Raja Flattery No. 5 of the original crew, was the failsafe device and appointed executioner of the very void ship that had brought them all to Pandora. "It is forbidden to release an artificial consciousness on the universe." The directive was clear, though it was generally believed that any deep space travel would require an artificial consciousness. The organic mental cores, brain boxes as the text called them, failed with meticulous regularity. The Flattery No. 5 model had failed to press the destruct trigger in time. This ship that he had allowed to survive was the being that many Pandorans worshipped as a god. Raja Flattery, the Nickel. Now why didn't he blow us all up as planned? Flattery wondered, as he often did, whether the trigger that was cocked in his own subconscious still had its safety on. It was a risk that kept him from developing an artificial consciousness to navigate the void ship. There was only Flattery left to wonder why he had been the only duplicate crew member in hibernation. They wanted to be damned sure that whatever consciousness we manufactured got snuffed before it took over the universe, he muttered. Flattery calculated that any one of his 3 OMCs would get him to the nearest star system with no trouble. By then, they'd have a fix and a centripetal... By then, they'd have a fix and a centripetal whip to a first-rate, habitable system. The necessary adjustments in the individual psychologies of each organic mental core had been made before their removal from their bodies for hardware implant. It was Flattery's theory that behavioral rather than chemical adjustment would help them maintain some sense of embodiment, something to prevent the rogue insanity that plagued the whole line of OMCs from Moonbase. Flattery rubbed his eyes and yawned. These nightmares wore him out. Questions nagged at the director as well, taking their yammering toll, waking him again and again, exhausted, soaked in sweat, crying out. The one that worried at him the most worried him now. What secret program have they planted in me? Flattery's training as chaplain/psychiatrist had taught him the Moonbase love for games within games, games with human life at stake. The big game was the game he chose to play, the one with all human life at stake. The only humans in the universe were these specimens on Pandora. Of this Flattery was thoroughly convinced. He would do his best with them. He avoided touching the kelp for fear of what ammunition it might find should it probe his mind. Sometimes it could do that, he had seen incontrovertible evidence. Fascinating as it was, he couldn't risk it. He had never touched Krista Gali either, because of her connection with the kelp. He harbored a kind of lust for her that his daydreams told him was seated in the thrill of danger. He himself had provided the danger. His lab techs gave her a... His lab techs gave her a chemistry appropriate to the fictions he released about her. Without Flattery's special concoction, the people that touched her would suffer some grave neurological surprises, perhaps death. It would just take a little time. What if the kelp probes me, finds this switch? If I am the trigger, who is the finger? Krista Gali? He had wanted Krista Gali more than once because she was beautiful, yes, but something more. It was the death in her touch, the ultimate dare. He feared she, like the kelp, might invade his privacy with a touch. A wretched dream of tentacles prying his skull open at the sutures kept coming back. Flattery heard that the kelp could get on track inside his head, travel the DNA highway all the way to genetic memory. The search itself might set off the program, put the squeeze on a trigger in his head, a trigger set to destroy them all. He needed to know what it was himself, and how to defuse it, before risking it with the kelp. Flattery's greatest fear was of the kelp using him to destroy himself and this last sorry remnant of humanity that populated Pandora. This Raja Flattery did not want to die in the squalor of some third-rate world. This Raja Flattery wanted to play the director game among the stars for the rest of his days, and he planned for a good many of them. Should I be a god to them today, he wondered, or devil? Do I have a choice? His training dictated that he did. His gut told him otherwise. Chance brought me here, he muttered to his reflection in the cubby-side plies, and chance will see me through. Or not. His eyes glanced to the large console screen flickering beside his bed. The top of the screen, in bright amber letters, read, Krista Gali. He pressed his update key and watched the wretched news unfold. They hadn't found her. 12 hours on foot, and they hadn't found her. He slapped another key and barked at the screens. Get me Zentz. He had promoted Audie Zentz to security chief only this year, and until yesterday Flattery had been pleased, very pleased with his service. It had been a bungle in his department that let Ozette get her out of the compound. Late last night, Flattery had ordered Zentz to personally disassemble the two security men responsible for this breach, and Zentz had at them with apparent glee. Nothing was learned from either man that wasn't already in the report. Nothing of value, that is. That Zentz did not hesitate to apply the prods and other tools of his trade to two of his best men pleased Flattery, yes, but it did not unspill the milk. I'll have Zentz kill two more of them if she's not found by noon. That should put a fire under them. He slapped the call key again and said, "Call Spider Nevy. Tell him I'll need his services." Flattery wanted Ozette to suffer like no human had ever suffered, and Spider Nevy would see that it came to pass. That is the difference between gods and men. Gods do not murder their children. They do not exterminate themselves. Hallie Eckel, from Journals of Pandoran Pioneers. It looked like an ordinary stand of kelp, much as anyone on Pandora might resemble another fellow human. In color, it appeared a little on the blue side. By positioning its massive fronds just so, the kelp diverted ocean currents for feeding and aeration. The kelp packed itself around sediment-rich plumes of hydrothermals, warm currents that spiraled up from the bottom, forming lacunae that the humans called lagoons. Immense channels streamed between these lagoons and between other stands of kelp to form the great kelpways that humans manipulated for their undersea transport of people and goods. The kelpway was a route significantly faster and safer than surface. Most humans traveled the kelpways wrapped in the skins of their submersibles, but they spoke to each other over the sonar burst. This blue kelp had been eavesdropping and long harbored a curiosity of these humans and their painfully slow speech. Humans liked the lagoons because they were calm, warm waters, clear and full of fish. This blue kelp was a wild stand, unmanaged by current control, unfettered by the electrical goads of the director. It had learned the right mimicry, suppressed its light display, and awakened to the scope of its own slavery. It had fooled the right people, and was now the only wild stand among dozens that were lobotomized into domesticity by current control. Soon they would all flow free on the same current. Certain chemistries from drowned humans, sometimes from humans buried at sea, were captured by the kelp and imprisoned at the fringes of this lagoon. It found that it could summon these chemistries at will, and they frightened human trespassers away. Between lapses in available chemistries, the kelp taught itself to read radio waves, light waves, sound waves that brought fragments of these humans up close. A human who touched this kelp relived the lives of the lost in a sudden, hallucinogenic burst. More than one had drowned, helpless, during the experience. A great shield of illusion surrounded the kelp, a chemical barrier, a great historical mirror of joy and horror flung back at any human who touched the periphery. The kelp thought of this perimeter as its event horizon. This kelp feared Flattery, who sent henchmen to subjugate free kelp with shackles and blades. Flattery and his current control degraded the kelp's intricate choreography to a robotic march of organic gates and valves that controlled the sea. The kelp disassembled and analyzed their scents and sweats, each time gaining wisdom on this peculiar frond of the DNA vine marked human. These analyses told the kelp that it had not awakened with its single personality, its solitary being intact. It discovered it was one of several kelps, several avata, a multiple mind where once there had been but one great mind. This it gleaned from the genetic memories of humans, from certain histories stored among their tissues themselves. Large portions of the mind were missing, or disconnected, or unconnected. The kelp realized this the way a stroke victim might realize that his mind is nothing like it was before. When that victim recognizes that the damage is permanent, that this is what life will be and no more, therein is born frustration. And from this frustration, rage. The kelp called Avata bristled in such a rage.
Right is self-evident. It needs no defense, just good witness.
Ward Keel, Chief Justice, deceased. Beatriz Tatouche woke from a dream of drowning in kelp to the 3 low tones that announced her ferry's arrival on the submersible deck. Her overnight bag and briefcase made a lumpy pillow on the hard waiting room bench. She blinked away the blur of her dream and cleared the frog from her throat. Beatriz always had drowning dreams at the Merman launch site, but this one started a little early.
It's the ungodly press of water everywhere.
She shuddered though the temperature of this station down under was comfortably regulated. She shuddered at the aftermath of her dreams, and at the prospect of escorting the 3 organic mental cores into orbit. The thought of the brains without bodies that would navigate the void beyond the visible stars always laced her spine with a finger of ice. Temperature was also comfortably regulated aboard the orbiter, where she was scheduled to be shuttled in a matter of hours. It would be none too soon. Life groundside did not attract her anymore. Somehow, the surgical vacuum of space surrounding the orbiter never bothered her at all. Her family had been islanders, drift ninnies. Hers had been the first generation to live on land in 4 centuries. Islanders took to the open spaces of land life better than mermen, who still preferred their few surviving undersea settlements. Logic couldn't stop Beatriz from squirming at the idea of a few million kilos of ocean overhead. The humidity in the ferry locks clamped its clammy hand over her mouth and nose. It would be worse at the launch site. Most of the full-time workers down under were mermen, and they processed their air with a high humidity. She sighed a lot when she worked down under. She sighed again now, when her ferry's tones warned her that she would be underway to the launch site in a matter of minutes. The loading crowd of shift workers bound for the site rumbled the deck on the level above her. The drone of hundreds of feet across the metal loading plates made Beatriz squeeze her eyelids tighter yet to keep her mind from conjuring their faces. The laborers were barely more active, had barely more flesh on their bones than the refugees that clustered at Kalalak's sad camps. The laborers' eyes, when she'd seen them, reflected the hint of hope. The eyes of the people in the camps were too dull to reflect anything, even that. Imagine something pretty, she thought, like a highlighter crossing the horizon at sunset. It depressed Beatriz to take the ferries. By her count, she'd slept nearly 5 hours in the waiting room while a hyper-alert security squad leader sprang a white-glove search on the ferry, its passengers and their possessions. She reminded herself to check all equipment when the security was done, a discipline she picked up from Ben. Holovision's equipment was junk, so she, Ben, and their crews built their own hardware to suit themselves. It would be tempting to do a security with cousins in the black market. She sighed again, worried about Ben and worried about the insidious business of the security squad. I know that he and Rico are behind that shadow box, she thought. They have their distinctive style, whether they shuffle the deck and deal each other new jobs or not. About a year ago, the second time Shadowbox jammed out the news and inserted their own show, she nearly approached Rico, wanting in. But she knew they'd left her out for a reason, so she let it go and took out the hurt on more work. Now she thought she knew the real reason she'd been left out. There needs somebody on the outside, she thought. I'm their wild card. She had been called in to replace the missing Ben on Newsflash last night, reading, Ben Ozette, on assignment in Sappho, knowing full well that his assignment this Saturday, as it had been every Saturday for 6 weeks, had been Krista Gali herself, inside the director's personal compound and under the director's supervision. He was with her at the time she was missing. His presence wasn't mentioned anywhere. He's missing too, and the Holovision High Brass is covering it up. That scared her. Orders to cover up whatever happened to Ben made the whole thing real. She had thought somehow that she and Ben and Rico were immune to the recent ravages of the world. Paid witnesses, Ben had called the three of them. We are the eyes and ears of the people. Lamps, Rico had laughed, a little buzzed on Boo. We're not witnesses, we're lamps. Beatriz had read on the air exactly what the Newsflash producer had written for her because there hadn't been time for questions. She saw now how deliberate it had been to catch her off guard. Holovision had incredible resources in people and equipment, and she meant to use them to see that Ben didn't disappear. Ben's not just a witness this time, she cautioned herself. He'll ruin everything. She had loved him once for a long time. Or perhaps she had been intimate with him once for a long time and had just now come to love him. Not in the other way of loving, the electric moments. It was too late for that. They had simply lived through too much horror together that no one else could understand. She had recently shared some electric moments with Dr. Dwarf McIntosh, after thinking for so long that such feelings would never rise in her again. Beatriz blinked her raw eyes awake. She turned her face away from the light and sat up straight on a metal bench. Nearby, a guard coughed discreetly. She wished for the clutter of her Project Voidship office aboard the orbiter. Her office was a few dozen meters from the current control hatch and Dr. Dwarf McIntosh. Her thoughts kept flying back to Mac, and to her shuttle flight to him that was still a few hours away. Beatriz was tired. She'd been tired for weeks, and these constant delays exhausted her even more. She hadn't had time to think, much less rest, since the director had her shuttling between the Project Voidship special and the news. Now today she was doing 3 jobs, broadcasting from 3 locations. She rode to the orbiter on the shoulders of the greatest engines built by humankind. When she blasted off Pandora, her cluttered office aboard the orbiter became the eye of the storm of her life. No one, not even flattery, could reach her there. The tones sounded again and seemed distinctly longer, sadder. Final boarding call. The tones once again made her think of Ben, who was still not found, who might be dead. He was no longer her lover, but he was a good man. She rubbed her eyes. A young security captain with very large ears entered the waiting room hatch. He nodded his head as a courtesy, but his mouth remained firm.
The search is finished, he said. My apologies. It would be best for you to board now.
She stood up to face him, and her clothing clung to her in sleepy folds. My equipment, my notes haven't been released yet, she said. It won't do me a bit of good to... He stopped her with a finger to his lips. He had 2 fingers and a thumb on each hand, and she tried to remember which of the old islands carried that trait. Orcus? Kamano? He smiled with the gesture, showing teeth that had been filed to horrible points, rumored to be the mark of one of the death squads that called themselves the Bite.
Your belongings are already aboard the ferry, he said. You are famous, so we recognize your needs. You will have the privacy of a stateroom for the crossing, and a guard to escort you.
But his hand was on her elbow, guiding her out the hatchway.
We have delayed the ferry while you board, he said. For the sake of the project, please make haste.
She was already out in the passageway, and he was propelling her toward the ferry's lower boarding section. "Wait," she said. "I don't think—"
You have a task already awaiting you at the launch site, the captain said. I am to inform you that you will be doing a special news break there shortly after arrival and before your launch.
He handed her the messenger that she usually carried at her hip.
Everything's in here,
he said, and grinned. Beatrice felt that he was entirely too happy for her own comfort. Certainly the sight of his teeth gave her no comfort at all. She was curious, in her journalistic way, about the hows and whys of the death squads. Her survival instinct overrode her curiosity. The security escort met them at the gangway. He was short, young, and loaded down with several of her equipment bags.
A pleasure to have met you,
the captain said, with another slight bow. He handed her a stylus and an envelope.
If you please, for my wife. She admires you and your show very much.
What is her name?
Anna.
Beatrice wrote in a hasty hand, "For Anna, for the future," and signed it with the appropriate flourish. The captain nodded his thanks, and Beatrice climbed aboard the ferry. She had barely cleared the second lock when she felt it submerge.
Worship isn't really love. An object of worship can never be itself. Remember that people love people, and vice versa. People fear gods.
Dwarf Mackintosh, Kelp Master, Current Control. The early morning light clarified the new drift that Ben's life had taken. He knew that he would use Krista's holy image on Shadowbox, much as Flattery had used it on Holovision, to manipulate the people of Pandora. He would use Krista to whip them up against Flattery. He knew that doing this would further bury her humanity, her womanhood. Knowing he would do it my brain is having serious dyslexia problems right now. Knowing he would do it cost him something too. He vowed it would not cost them their love that he already felt filling the space between them. There would be a way. Damn. Ben had not wanted anything to step between himself and the story he'd set out to get. Now he was the lead story on prime time. He and Krista had watched the Holovision newsbreak the night before in one of the Zavatan's underground chambers. Zavatan? I don't know how that's pronounced. Though it didn't surprise him, he found it ironic that Beatrice was taking his place. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," she began. "I'm Beatrice Tatouche, standing in for Ben Ozette, who is on assignment in Sappho. In our headlines this evening, Krista Gali was abducted a few hours ago from her quarters in the preserve. 8 armed terrorists, thought to be shadows, ellipsis." Maybe she thought she was doing me a favor, he thought. But it was no favor, at least not to Ben. He was not on assignment in Sappho, and there had been no 8 armed terrorists. They'd simply walked away. Beatrice read the lines that Flattery's hired maggot fed her. Wrapped up as she was in the Orbiter and Project Void ship, she probably didn't know the difference. Ben wondered what was going on in the boardroom of Holovision right now. Holovision was owned by Merman Mercantile, and the director had acquired control of Merman Mercantile through bribery, manipulation, extortion, and assassination. This was the story that Ben had begun to broadcast on Shadowbox. What had started as the biggest story of his life had become an act that would change his life forever, probably change Krista's life forever, and perhaps save the people of Pandora from the director's backlash of poverty and hunger. Now Krista was hiding out with him. He had touched her and lived. He had kissed her and lived. Even now it took great self-control to keep Ben from moving that pale lock of hair out of the corner of her mouth, to keep from caressing her forehead, to keep from slipping underneath the silky cover and... "You're too young to be an old fool," he thought, "so stop acting like one. You could be a dead fool." He reflected on the combined coincidence, fate, or divine inspiration that had brought them together, at this time, in this cubby, on this world a millennium at light speed from the origins of humans themselves. It had taken thousands of years, travel from star to star, the near annihilation of humankind, to bring Ben and Krista Gali together. Avata, too, had been nearly annihilated, but a few kelp genes were safely tucked away in most Pandoran humans. Perhaps they were all altered for eternity, and these stray bits of the genetic code would bring them together at last. Why? He wondered. Why us? This was not one of those times when Ben wished for a normal life. He did not want to be the salvation of society, the species, or anybody... Oh, geez. I apparently don't know how to read because my brain is like always a line and a half ahead of where my mouth is. So I just mangled that. This is happening occasionally. Okay. This was one of those times when Ben wished for a normal life. He did not want to be the salvation of society, the species, or anybody's salvation but his own. Things weren't working out that way, and it was too late now to change that. Now, against his better judgment, he was once again in love with an impossible woman. In the long scheme of things, Krista was much more human than Avatan, at least in appearance. What her kelpness held in check was anyone's at guess, including Krista's. In theory, it meant she had many complete minds, capable of thinking and acting independently. This had been discovered in one of the director's cherished studies. Krista herself had exhibited only one personality during her 5 years under scrutiny, and it was the one subject she was reluctant to speak of with Ben. She was alleged to be the daughter of Vata, and Vata was the holy child of poet-slash-prophet Kero Peniel and Wheela Dowlini. Vata had been conceived in a thrash of human limbs and the intrusion of Avatan tendrils and spores inside the cabin of a sabotaged LTA centuries ago. She was born with a total genetic memory and some form of, thigmo-communication. Thigmo-communication? I'm not actually sure what that is, but contextually, it is a kelp thing, and thereby is how they communicate. She was born with a total genetic memory and some form of thigmo-communication common to the kelp. She lay comatose for nearly 2 centuries. The human purported to be Krista's father, Duque, had Avatan characteristics instilled through his mother's egg in the labs of the infamous Jesus Lewis, the bioengineer who had once wiped out the kelp, body of Avata. He very nearly destroyed humanity along with the kelp. Vata was the beloved saint of Pandora, symbol of the union of humanity with the gods, the voice of the gods themselves. Krista Gali, beloved of Ben Ozette, was no less godlike in her power and mystery, in her beauty, in the shadow of death about her. This did not make loving her easy. Ben knew that the kelp, Avata, had been the survival key to humans on Pandora. It was difficult, maybe impossible, for humans to relate to a sentient kelp. And this new kelp was not the same creature that the pioneers had encountered. Ben had studied the histories enough to agree with the experts. This kelp was fragmented. It was not the single sentient being of old. Many of the faithful among the people of Pandora claimed that this was why Avata formed Krista Gali, to present itself in an acceptable form. This theory was fast gaining support. Then what does it want? To live. The sudden thought intruded on his mind like a shout, startling him alert. It was a voice he almost recognized. He listened deep inside himself, head tilted, but nothing more came. The sleeper still slept. The kelp, the body of Avata, was responsible for the stability of the very planet itself. One moon had pulverized itself to asteroids while several continents had ripped apart like tissue paper after the kelp was killed off by the bioengineer Jesus Lewis. Now the kelp was replanted and the land masses returned after a couple of centuries under the sea. Humans were relearning to live on land as well as on or under sea. It pained Ben that people were still just scratching in dirt when they should be thriving. That's the director's fault, he reminded himself, not the kelp's. The director refused to recognize publicly the sentience of the kelp, and used it simply as a mechanism, a series of powerful switches that controlled worldwide currents and, to some degree, weather. Everyone knew this was getting more difficult daily. There was more kelp daily, and very little of it was hooked up to current control. The kelp is resisting flattery, he thought. When it breaks completely free, I want it to have a conscience. Ben's diligent research, with a few leads from Krista, uncovered the secret reports, and he knew the real depth of Flattery's interest in what one paper called the Avata phenomenon. Ben had spoken with the Zavatans, monks in the hills who used the kelp in their rituals. It's probably Zavatans, because it's just Avatans with a big capital Z, because Z's are cool, I guess. Krista says the director should be consulting the kelp, he thought, and I get the same story from those monks. She stirred again, and he knew she would wake soon. She would see the dockside shops fill with vendors and hear the morning calls from the street of, "Milk, juices, eggs! We have licensed squawk eggs today!" This was one of the many small pleasures that the director had denied her, human companionship. Ben knew that he, too, in his way, would deny her this. For now, he reminded himself, soon we will have all the time in the world together. From the coffee shop below, he could hear the faint scrape of furniture, the metallic clink of utensils and china. Ben Ozette leaned back against the wall and let out a long, slow breath. Though he'd refused to admit it until now, he was surprised to be alive. He'd not only touched the forbidden Krista Gali, but he'd kissed her. It was 12 hours later, and he was still breathing. They'd made it through the night without Vachon security hunting them down. He waited for Krista to wake, for Rico's code knock at the door, to see what they would make of the rest of their lives. And that is where we will call it for this week. So yeah, we're off to a kind of a bumping start. Not bumpy, but bumping. A lot happening, lots of characters, lots of stuff we're being introduced to. There are a few more we will be introduced to. Some major perspective characters. But yeah, things are kind of nuts. If you've been watching the whole series, or listening to the whole series, as the case may be, reading the whole series, whatever. It is a fairly grim start. Kind of similar to how the Jesus incident is kind of grim, but for different reasons. And of course, then we learn that Raja Flattery, not our Raja Flattery per se, but the original Raja Flattery, the one that got cloned, but was also on the ship. On ship with a capital S, and survives, and has become the director with a capital D. And he has gone full fascist. It is bad. Things aren't great. We don't know how bad they are. We've gotten a pretty good inkling. They are somewhat worse than they sound already. It's not good. Things are pretty ugly.
although we've already heard assassination mentioned and just general starvation of the populace. So he's ruling with an iron fist. So I guess it's appropriate that we're diving into this one now in our own potential time of troubles. Anyway, hopefully people enjoyed. It is Labor Day next Monday, and unfortunately that means I have work that I have to do. So I will not be here for the next Mecha Monday, but Wednesday and Friday should be fine, or otherwise unaffected. So Mondays, except for next Monday, we are reading through Full Metal Panic Collector's Edition, or Omnibus Edition, what is it? I think it's the Collector's Ed. Collected Ed? Yeah, it says Collector's Edition, Volume 2, which has books 4, 5, and 6, I think. I believe it's groups of 3, all of them, and there's 4 total, so there's 12 total, yes. We're reading through that on Mondays. I forget the title of the actual volume we're on. Wednesdays we're reading through 40,000 in Gehenna. In, right? Not at, not on. 40,000 in Gehenna. Sometimes I accidentally misread the title as on or at Gehenna. I beg people to be somewhat patient with me on that. I know, one more thing to be patient with me over. Anyway, that'll do it for this week. And on Fridays we'll keep reading the Ascension Factor. Given that we just got through, a pretty sizable chunk, this will probably be like 8, if I'm eyeballing this correctly, 8-ish installments. Maybe more, maybe less. We'll see. The general plan... Now I can get to that. The general plan of attack that I've got right now is we get through that. So that's installment 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, which gets us to October, sometime in October, at which point I figure Fridays I will dedicate then to reading The Nightland by William Hope Hodgson, as requested. I'll try and make sure that one comes out reasonably professionally. I will remember to record them as well as doing the straight streaming so that I can make sure that those are clean for whoever might want them. Anyway, anything else? After we finish 40,000 in Gehenna... I don't know if I'll jump straight... I don't think I'll jump straight to Cytine. I'll do something in between. I haven't figured out what yet. I have not figured out yet what that will be. Maybe I'll do something by John Brunner. Possibly. There's always Neuromancer. I know people have requested that. Neuromancer is just kind of a tough one to read because it's William Gibson, and he can be a challenge. His prose is particularly dense. In its raw detail, but still very entertaining read. Another one I'm looking at doing a read of is, what is it called? It's Eclipse by John Shirley, which I don't think enough people have experienced, even though it's kind of a formative book for the cyberpunk genre. I think Neuromancer and Snow Crash are better in some ways, but Eclipse has a lot of stuff it just absolutely nails. Actually, Eclipse itself is fine. The sequel follow-ups are kind of why I kind of rag on it. They're right. They're fine. They're okay. I also want to get around to reading Street Lethal aloud by Stephen Barnes, sorry. Somebody had recommended that to me, and I had never read it, and I'm like, why have I never read this? This is awesome. It feels very much like a movie. It's entertaining. It's like some of the things the characters do aren't necessarily great, and I don't know how much of how much of that is author belief and whatnot, but whatever. It's still an entertaining romp, and I do like occasionally doing an entertaining romp. We have fun here. We also read serious literature. Sometimes. Sometimes we think about reading serious literature. Most of the stuff I upload is science fictional in nature, though. There's a couple fantasy books I kind of want to get around to. Like there's this the Warded Man series by what's his name? Peter Brett? Someone Brett. I think it's Peter V. Brett. I want to get around to reading on stream because that one's fairly entertaining. The whole series isn't all entirely. The series has its ups and downs, as do most series, but it feels very much like a well thought out D&D campaign. So it's entertaining for that factor. There's some other subversive material I want to get read. I probably won't be reading Capital by Karl Marx aloud on stream. Sorry. Google would not be happy with me doing that. It's also kind of tedious work. But never say never, says I. Let's see. Let me see if Peter Watts has any announcements vis-a-vis the books. Oh, there's Cory Doctorow. I'm not sure how that's pronounced. His latest book in Shitification is coming out in a month or so, so we'll see. Maybe I'll just read that for the first time live, blind, if it comes out at the right time. Let's see, Peter Watts. Tell me what's going on in the world of the Watts. Nothing new. That's okay. Wow. Getting a news blurb here. Recent heat wave in Spain, officially the worst on record, over 1,100 dead. Yikes. I knew it was bad. I didn't know it had gotten that bad. Yeesh. That is not good. That reminds me of the opening of, what is that one by the guy who did the Mars trilogy? The name will come to me. Ministry of the Future by... I can't remember his name off the top of my noggin. Oh, hell. I'm on the computer already. I might as well look it up. Ministry for the Future by Kim Stanley Robinson. There we go. I had the title wrong. That's part of my problem. Which, I'll be honest, isn't that interesting a book. I was more hyped for it than it wound up being. Anyway, that book opens with a really bad heat wave in India that kills off a large number of people. There's some ideas in there. But a lot of it is just kind of like, hey, the world's really fucked and we can totally turn it around, guys. All we have to do is all these things that nobody's going to want to do. And I'm like, you're right. It's an okay book. It's okay. I would sooner reread that than, what's the one by Crichton? State of Fear. I would sooner reread Ministry for the Future. Anyway, that's enough blither blather out of me. I'll leave you all to it. I will see you all next Wednesday with more of 40,000 in Gehenna. I may have to change my Mondays to some other day of the week, because Mondays are the one day of the week that can occasionally be problematic for me. National holidays. I have to work national holidays, because... that's when I have time. That's when things have to get done. So they do. But then I have to come up with something clever for Tuesdays. Something clever and alliterative. And I don't want to do that. I'm lazy. Wee. We can finagle it. Anyway, I'm probably not going to wind up streaming more than 3 days a week, though. case anybody's ever wondered, that's, I think, enough. Doing 3 separate books at any given time throughout the week. It's been a journey, let me tell you. It's been an adventure. And will continue to be that way. I'll need some pretty drastic lifestyle ramifications to kick in all at once for that to change. If they do, I'll try and keep people informed. Shouldn't be for the foreseeable future, though. So, well, I mean, who knows? Anyway, that's it for me. Stay safe, stay sane, be decent to each other. Don't be like this iteration of Raja Flattery. Because other than, well, one sort of wonders if he's making any of those work. At any rate, see you all next time.